Today's deep dive is sponsored by Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate covering Northern Nevada. We're diving into a Redfin report that really highlights the challenges so many Americans are facing.
Yeah.
Right now when it comes to affording housing.
Yeah.
It's something you're probably seeing in the news, maybe even feeling personally. And this deep dive is going to unpack some of the reasons why things are so tough.
Yeah. It's really eye-opening to see the data laid out like this. For example, the report highlights that almost 3/4 of Americans making under $50,000 a year
Wow.
are struggling to make their rent or mortgage payments.
Wow.
That's a huge chunk of the population.
It really is. And it's
Yeah.
not just a tight budget situation for these folks either. The report talks about people having to make some really tough choices. Nearly a quarter are skipping meals just to afford their housing.
Right.
Apps.
And this isn't a new phenomenon either. This has been brewing for at least 5 years, driven by a perfect storm of soaring housing costs and wages that simply haven't kept pace. It's like trying to climb a ladder where the rungs are getting further and further apart.
Definitely not an easy situation to be in. And I think what struck me is that this isn't just about renters, is it? The report shows homeownership is slipping further and further out of reach for many, especially those with lower incomes.
Absolutely. A lot of us grew up with this idea that homeownership is part of the American dream. But the reality is that dream is fading for a lot of people. Just to give you a sense of how much things have changed, the median home price has skyrocketed by almost 40% since the start of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
That's an enormous leap in such a short time.
And it's not just the raw numbers, is it? The report shares a story about a woman who's been working as a teacher for 15 years. She always wanted to own a home. But even with her steady job and good credit, she's priced out of the market completely in her city.
Yeah, that's the kind of story that really brings it home. And this woman's situation isn't unique either. The report states that to afford even a median-priced starter home these days, you need a household income of around $77,000 annually. $77,000. Wow. And that's just to get your foot in the door, not even considering the ongoing costs of property taxes, maintenance, and everything else that comes with homeownership.
It's definitely a sobering reality check for a lot
Right.
of people. And perhaps, unsurprisingly, it's hitting younger generations particularly hard.
Right. The report dives specifically into the challenges Gen Z is facing. I was pretty shocked to learn that a whopping 71% of them are struggling with housing payments. That's more than any other generation.
Wow. I think that statistic highlights the unique pressures this generation is under. They're entering the housing market at a time of peak prices. They're generally earning less than previous generations at the same age. And there's this pervasive sense of financial insecurity that's really hanging over them.
It makes you wonder, how are they even coping? The report mentions selling belongings just to make ends meet. Did that stand out to you at all? Yeah, it did. That really struck a chord with me too. The report mentions that almost a quarter of Gen Zers who are struggling with housing costs have resorted to selling possessions. Think about that for a moment. These are things with sentimental value. Maybe family heirlooms or items they were saving for their own future.
It's a powerful illustration of how desperate the situation is becoming for some. And it's not just limited to selling things, is it? The report goes on to describe other ways both Gen Z and millennials are trying to stay afloat. Things like moving in with romantic partners, taking on extra jobs, even putting off necessary medical care.
Yeah, you're right. It paints this picture of people constantly juggling, trying to make ends meet. And it's important to recognize that these are just temporary fixes. They might help in the short term, but they also have the potential to create long-term issues down the road.
I'm curious about those long-term issues.
Yeah.
What kind of consequences could we be looking at here?
Well, if people are constantly delaying things like starting families or investing in their health because they're so financially strapped, it's not hard to see how that could snowball into bigger problems down the line.
Okay.
And then there's the impact on overall well-being. The stress, the anxiety that comes with living paycheck to paycheck, constantly worrying about making rent or mortgage payments, that takes a toll too.
Absolutely. And the longer these trends continue, the more pronounced those impacts are likely to become. It makes you wonder what potential solutions are out there to address this housing affordability crisis. Where do we even begin to tackle a problem this big?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's complex, and it's going to require a multifaceted approach. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but there are a few key areas we need to focus on.
So where do we start? What are some of those key areas?
Well, for starters, we need to increase the supply of affordable housing. Right now, in many areas, there simply aren't enough housing units to meet the demand, especially at price points that are accessible to lower and middle income earners.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as just throwing up a bunch of new buildings, right?
Exactly. We need to be strategic about it. This
Yeah.
means promoting policies that encourage the development of mixed income housing, creating more housing options near public transportation,
Yeah.
and exploring alternative housing models like accessory dwelling units. We need to move beyond just the traditional single-family home model and look at things more creatively.
This deep dive is sponsored by Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate covering Northern Nevada. And it seems like this is something real estate professionals like Skip are dealing with every day.
Absolutely. Agents on the ground are seeing firsthand how these market forces are impacting their clients, both buyers and sellers. They're having to navigate increasingly complex situations and help people understand their options in a really challenging market.
It's a lot to unpack.
Mhm.
But as we've been talking, I keep coming back to this question of personal responsibility. What can we as individuals do to contribute to solutions? Even if we're not in positions to change policy or develop housing projects?
That's such a vital question. I think awareness is a powerful starting point. We need to keep having these conversations, even when they're difficult. We need to educate ourselves about the issues impacting our communities and advocate for policies that promote affordable housing. Even small actions can make a difference.
So things like supporting local organizations working on housing issues, talking to our elected officials about our concerns, staying informed about proposed developments in our neighborhoods.
Exactly. Every voice matters. And ultimately, this is about creating a future where everyone has the opportunity to live in a safe, affordable home. That's a goal worth striving for, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one final thought you'd want our listener to take away from our conversation today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this isn't just a problem for policymakers or economists to solve. It's something that affects all of us. And it's going to take all of us working together to find solutions. We need to shift our mindset from someone else will fix it to what can I do to contribute?
I love that. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this ecosystem. And even small actions can have a ripple effect. Maybe it's volunteering at a local housing organization, donating to a cause you believe in, or simply having these conversations with your friends and family.
Exactly. And it's about being informed voters, too. Paying attention to local elections, understanding where candidates stand on housing issues, and making our voices heard at the ballot box. Those choices have a real impact on the policies that shape our communities.
So for our listener out there who's been taking this all in, what's resonating with you most from this deep dive? What's got you thinking?
For me, it's the stories. It's easy to get lost in the statistics. But when you hear about real people struggling to keep a roof over their heads, having to make impossible choices just to get by, that's what really hits home. It reminds us that this isn't just an abstract problem. It's impacting real lives in very real ways.
It's a good reminder that behind every data point, there's a human story. And while the situation can feel overwhelming at times, it's also inspiring to see the resilience and creativity people are demonstrating in the face of these challenges.
Absolutely. From individuals finding innovative ways to make ends meet, to communities coming together to support those in need, there's a lot of hope to be found amidst the struggle.
Well said. And a huge thank you to Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate covering Northern Nevada for sponsoring today's deep dive. We appreciate your support in bringing these important conversations to our listeners. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.